Afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to this week's Scrum Pulse with professional Scrum Trainer Peter Koning. He'll be talking about some of the content in his new book, the Agile Leadership Toolkit, which is a part of the Professional Scrum series. I'm Lindsay Vellicina. I am the Marketing Communications Manager here at Scrum.org, and I'll be your moderator today. Peter, can you please switch to the next slide so I can go over some quick housekeeping items? Thank you. So some very quick guidelines here. So we have a chat box that we would like you to utilize to ask questions throughout the webinar. There's a question box and a chat box. Please utilize those. I'll be fielding questions throughout to ask Peter. So please stay interactive. Next slide. So a little bit about Scrum.org. We were founded by Ken Schwaber, one of the co-creators of Scrum, back in 2009. We offer Scrum training and certification with about 300 professional Scrum trainers globally. So we have classes all over the place. Our classes are geared toward the roles in Scrum and also other topics, including leadership, scaling with Nexus, using Scrum with Kanban as a complementary practice. And we also have our PSU class, which teaches how to integrate UX designers into Scrum. With that, I'll turn it over to Peter and let him introduce himself. Go ahead, Peter.
Yes, thank you very much, Lindsay. So hi, everybody. Also from my side, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. So my name is Peter. I will tell you more about myself in a few minutes, but I will tell you all about Agile leadership and how we can really create this different environment for self-managing or Agile teams. So how did I came up with this book and how did I get passionate by Agile leadership? Well, one of the things I saw when I started to work with Agile 15 years ago is that once individual team, you can relatively easy get up to speed. It's still hard work, but it's relatively easy. You can create a lot of trust. People get starting to collaborate with each other, get into the Scrum rhythm, get into the Agile mindset. But when the team started growing and when more and more teams started to collaborate with each other, I saw that most of those teams start hitting the ceiling of management and existing governance. And to further grow the teams, we really had to change the existing leadership, the existing governance, and mostly also all about the culture. So 6-7 years ago, I started the search for how can we really create this different environment for self-managing teams, because self-managing teams, the leader of a self-managing team is like a farmer who doesn't grow crops by pulling them, but instead creates the perfect environment for the crops to grow and thrive. So when you look at Agile teams and self-managing Agile teams, when they start growing, you probably as a leader created the right environment. But when they are not growing, what should you do? How can you, when you as a leader step in, not put a brake on Agile, but really help the teams and start accelerating the team? So which tools, which practices, which sentences do you as a leader have to say, have to have for the teams to really grow into the next level of agility? That's a quest I started several years ago, and the last years was hard discovery. Many ideas failed, but several ideas succeeded, and they were all written down in this new book that I wrote, Agile Leadership Toolkit. So before we dive into the details, a little bit more about the person who you listen to and can see in a small window. So my name is Peter. I live in the Netherlands. I don't live in a mill. I just live in a normal house. I don't wear wooden shoes, just regular shoes. I'm happily married. I have 2 kids. I have been an Agile manager for 10 years or more. I studied computer science, artificial intelligence way back, and I love to coach Agile leaders in large organizations. I love Formula 1, especially Max Verstappen, of course, and I love to speed cycle. So you have a little bit more an idea of the person that you listen to. So let's get back to the topic. one of the things that I saw is that there are several, relatively only a few people, agile leaders that I met that by nature had the right mindset. And most leaders that I trained and coached, I could tell them the mindset, but they really started to adopt the mindset when they start using the tools. Else it would, my explanations would be a lot like swimming on dry land, learning to swim and while you're not in the water. So one of the things that I did is find tools, help the leader to, by doing the tools, applying the tools, start adopting the agile mindset. That's also how I learned agility and agile, by doing a lot of sprints and having a lot of reviews and retrospectives. I started to adopt the agile mindset a lot. So it's a very practical book to, by doing, becoming more and more an agile leader. And one of the things that I saw is that when you look at agility and agile, there are a lot of things that have to be in place. But the four most important things that have to be in place is it should be clear what the teams have to achieve. There should be a lot of ownership. Teams should learn faster, and there should be the right culture. So the book contains of 4 parts. Each part has two tools which summarize up to 8 tools and 4 specific roles for the agile leader. These tools are not complete and the parts are not sufficient for the rest of your life. But over the last years, I discovered that is a very good start for the leaders to create this environment for self-managing teams to thrive. So during this webinar, we will talk about the first 2 parts. We will talk about co-creating goals, and we will talk about facilitating ownership, and we will briefly hit creating the right culture as a leader. Let's get started. So the first part, your role as a leader is to be the co-creator of goals. So together with other leaders, product owners, product managers, make sure that it is clear for the teams what the objective is. So how do you do that? Let's have a closer look on that. One of the things that I discovered is that we can actually learn something from these lighthouses. So why can we learn something from lighthouses? Well, they are built for storms. They are built for unpredictable weather, to stay in the same place and to really guide ships and people at sea to know where they are and how to head further. And I think agility is, you might say, a bit overrated. We try to do a lot with agile and saying, well, when we do it in an agile way, it's always good. But what I see over and over again with successful companies with the agile mindset is that they use agile as a way to discover how to improve customer impact. So let's have a closer look. Who recognizes this logo? This is a logo of a famous company, but it was their previous logo. Perhaps when you look at purple icons, you might already recognize it, but it was a company that already shipped a lot of DVDs for 10 years ago, over 10 years ago, and it was Netflix. So Netflix was used to deliver movies and a time of relaxation to their customers through a total different way. But over the last 20 years, they have pretty much the same customer impact. Although the way they give that customer impact to their users is changed totally from shipping the physical DVDs by mail to streaming movies online. But customer impact behind that, it hasn't changed for the last 20, 30, 50 years. And I think the same counts for many companies. When you look at companies that are bankrupt, for example, Toys R Us in the States or Intertoys in the Western of Europe, it's not that the kids don't play with toys anymore. Even the toys market has increased a lot, although the way we get those toys and the way we use those toys has changed a lot. So the lighthouse in all those fast changing and ever accelerating markets is not per se the products and services, but the customer impact behind it. And I think a lot of companies have to to start navigating towards the customer impact and use that as a steady navigation or a steady direction, and along the way discover and use agility to solve that customer impact in a different way. And how can you make that practical tomorrow with your agile teams? When you look at your company, there are a lot of metrics that are focused internally, but the most important metric is the metric that resonates with the positive impact at the customer. So I draw this smiley head with a king because the customer is king. So the agility should not be about changing your plans with new ideas, but the agility is to find new ways to solve the same customer impact even better. So the company delivers products and services to their users, which has a positive impact, and that returns value. And when you look at companies like Netflix, this circle is the same for the last 20 years. They are still delivering the same positive customer impact, which is watching movies, but the way they do that is totally different. And one way to make that very practical is what I call a key value indicator, KVI. And the KVI stands for the customer impact or the value that is actually delivered. And a few years ago, I was at a company and they were talking about DAO all day. And I thought, DAO? What is DAO? And they were so common in explaining that the explanation went too quickly for me. So they said, daily active use. And I asked them, what did you say? Daily active use. And I said, please slow down. I don't understand. And then they said, well, it stands for daily active users. And the DAO was their key value indicator. That is the number of users for the last 24 hours that use their app was giving them the indication that they were improving customer impact. And they could actually show this trend line as illustrated in the book on how the key KVI evolved during the months and years. And this KVI really helped the teams in setting priorities, making decisions, and when they entered the building in the morning, everybody was asking about the current level of DAO, what it was doing, and how the improvements of the last week was influencing positively or negatively this metric. And what I see is that when successful with agile teams and when they start growing, those teams know their customer impact and they know how they are not steering their velocity, but they know how their changes that they made and the things that they developed, how that influences the user's metrics. So the key value indicator is one of the tools of the book, and it is the most important indicator for the team to find out whether they generate value. And this KVI is preferably one metric visualized in a trend line that makes the relationship between customer impact and value for the company tangible. And it is, sometimes hard to discover them and to find them, but this is a very tangible way how the leader can actually improve the environment when he wants to step in and really help the teams, because this gives direction to the team, and this KVI becomes the lighthouse for the teams to focus on customer impact instead of internal metrics or just the velocity. There is a nice checklist which you can use for this metric, and I call it the 5 times I. And it says, well, does the team feel that they can have influence on this metric? Do they feel that the metric is just given, or do they actually feel that they can, by their actions, influence it? Do the teams have insight on it on a daily basis, or do they have to go a long way and ask a lot of people before they get the insight? And another thing is, does it generate ideas? So when you talk about this metric, do the teams actually come up with ideas? Well, we can do this to improve it, we can do that to improve. Does it have a clear intent behind it? Well, why do we have this metric? Is it also clear? And do the teams feel that it really resonates with what they do with the customers? So that's all about the customer impact.
So Peter, in the book, you share some concrete actions to start taking with the 5 I's. Do you want to talk about those a little bit?
Yeah, so there are a few things that the leader actually can do to improve this KVI and how it's used. And one of the things is to really ask about customers whether they have. Yeah, did we talk to customers last week that are actually happy with the stuff that we delivered? Which is sometimes hard to discover when you have over hundreds of millions of users, but many companies in the B2B business to business market, yeah, they can actually come up with stories of customers that are really happy with the stuff that they delivered, and use those stories and anecdotes to give color and feeling to this metric. So that's one thing that you can do. Use the anecdotes of successful customers. And another thing is that when you have a lot of teams, some teams might have different KVIs than other teams.
Sure.
So also go talk with other teams, how they are doing, how they are using their KVIs, and use kind of internal road trips or internal sharing experience, how some teams use their KVI to make decisions, set priorities, and learn from each other.
Great.
So that are two nice examples that you can use tomorrow to put this in practice.
Awesome, thanks.
Yeah. So let's move to part 2, which is all about facilitating ownership. And when I talk about ownership is already a term that is used a lot in management for many years. But when you talk about self-managing or agile teams, ownership is crucial. You cannot have teams that are waiting for orders or complaining always or just following the process. You want the team to take ownership. And what I mean with ownership is that the team is proud, proactive, continuously improving, challenging themselves, giving feedback. And ownership is also not something that you can order the team. Well, take ownership, feel responsible. No, you can only create this environment where teams voluntarily take ownership. And creating this ownership is important, and Google and Netflix also studied how you can do that. And Google has a nice study on it. You can Google on it. One of the things that when you Google on rework, so redevelopment work, they talk about psychological safety, which is very important for teams to become high performing. Netflix also has a huge study on that, and one of the things is that they discovered is how much more effective is actually a team that takes ownership and becomes high performing. And the number is often really surprising managers when I ask them, so how much more effective do you think is a team that takes ownership and becomes high performing compares to a standard team? Most managers, and the audience can think for themselves for a few seconds, so how much more effective do you think a team that takes ownership and becomes high performing is? And Netflix doesn't use numbers like 20% or 50% more effective, but they actually use the number of 10. So they say that a high performing team is 10 times more effective. And that is not because they deliver 10 times the more functionality or output, but that is because what they actually do, what they achieve with those results is 10 times more effective in the market. So it generates 10 times more users, or 10 times more revenue, or 10 times more strategic advantage. And velocity is an indicator for how much, how do you call it in when you compare it to soccer or any other sport. So velocity is actually in miles run on the field or kilometers run, but the impact is whether they win the match or not. And a team that takes ownership, compared to in Google and Netflix, that's really making a huge difference. It's the most important thing to decide on an effective and a low effective team, a high effective team and a low effective team. And when I talk with coaches and managers, one of the things that most people will recognize is that hierarchy makes it slow. So a lot of hierarchy in the organization really slow down the speed, because teams will have to get permission or have to wait for decisions made by upper managers. And when I was becoming more and more an agile fanatic or an evangelist, I was thinking that freedom is very important. When the teams get a lot of freedom, that will stimulate them and that will give them to a high performing team. And a few years ago, I was meeting a manager. Her name was Petra, and she was really inspiring. She really had this charisma of this new leadership style, and she was really creating an inspiring vision on why she wants to become, why she uses agile. And I thought 3-4 years ago, I thought, well, you've got Martin Luther King, you've got John F. Kennedy, and you've got this Petra, and I'm here watching history making when there is this real agile leader that is going to change and influence positively her teams and her company. And she was talking about freedom a lot and ownership and taking initiatives and being a proactive team. But one of the things that really doubted me and started questioning whether agile was in essence very good is that when we returned to the teams a few months later, they were all demotivated. They were not taking initiative. And I thought, how could this be? You've got this very charismatic, positive leader that just gives trust and ownership by nature. How can the team take why are the team demotivated and passive and not taking initiatives anymore? And what we discovered is that freedom is kind of overrated. It's not really about freedom. But when we studied the teams, what we saw is that freedom and maturity there is this correlation between it. And let's have a closer look at that. So when you have low mature self-managing or agile teams and you give them a high amount of freedom, you end up with chaos, dissatisfaction, and your high talented people will ultimately leave. They might feel it like a freedom and liberating for a few weeks or days, but in the end they will start becoming dissatisfied and leave because they are just it's not a very healthy environment. And on the other hand, when you have high mature team that get too little freedom, they will also leave, get frustrated and feel dissatisfied. And this Petra that I was mentioning about, when you would have a dissatisfied team, her routine for the last 20 years that really made her successful was giving those teams more freedom, because she knew that when you give demotivated and frustrated team freedom and autonomy and really give them trust, they often become more happy and more taking initiative and more proud. But now she didn't had a low mature teams of high mature teams that got too little freedom, but she got low mature teams that got too much freedom, but she still saw the same thing of dissatisfied team and people leaving. And her routine was to give even more freedom, and that didn't make the teams more happier, so they even got more freedom, and they ended up in really making some bad business results and some bad mistakes. And by studying that and talking about it, we ended up with this ownership model, saying that it's not all about freedom, but it is about the right freedom that fits their maturity, and preferably a little bit more freedom than maturity, so that you walk over the edge of chaos. But this is how self-managing teams thrive and develop themselves. So the second part of my book is all about creating this environment where teams take ownership. And the way you can put this into practice is that you sit regularly with your teams to talk about and draw this model on a flip chart or put it on the projector. And how does it feel the last month? Do they feel in one of those red zones, or are we in the green zones? And what can we leaders change in the environment so that you teams pick up ownership and grow even further? So the book explains what ownership is, gives a nice definition of ownership, and explains all about the ownership model and how you can make more tangible what we mean with freedom, and how you can make an alignment on maturity on achieving the goals. So heading back to the overview, we started already with customer impact, but we are going to add that teams have to take ownership on this customer impact. And you as an Agile leader are responsible that your teams really take ownership and be proactive, are proud on the customer impact that they deliver. So let's move to the part 4, all about culture. And what I see a lot is that we blame the culture. When something is not working correctly, the culture gets the blame, and we think that when we change the culture, everything will become more easy and better. And most people really want a culture of teamwork, of learning, of craftsmanship, and of candor. But creating this culture is hard, but it is also very important, because Agile promotes less structures and less formal roles and less processes. Let's just give the teams the objective to deliver customer impact and steer on ownership. But because of those less structures and less formal roles, culture is even more important than ever before. So how can you as an Agile leader create this Agile culture? And one of the pitfalls that I hear a lot is that there should not be any ego in the room. So no room for ego, and people should just be part of the team. And what I saw is that when you try to minimize ego, you end up with your high talented people feeling blocked or not allowed to take initiatives. And what I always say is ego should always serve the team and customers. So there might be a lot of healthy ego in teams. They can be proud, people can have to take initiative, but that ego should always serve the team and the customers. And the ego that really has to leave the room is ego that is selfish and focused on experts only. And one of the things that when I coach mentors and when I coach Agile leaders and mentor them, one of the things that I talk about is who's the informal leader of the group. And one of the skills that we Agile leaders have to learn is to recognize informal leaders. And an informal leader, what's the definition of an informal leader? An informal leader is the person in the room that has followers. His or her decision is and opinion is copied by others. And when there is a moment of silence, that person often is looked at and really can help and get the team further. And one of the things that why we still need formal leaders is because when the informal leader is bad, when it doesn't create customer focus or doesn't improve the team, the rest of the group cannot change or influence the wrong informal leader, because he has just too many status and too many influence in the team. And that's the moment when the formal leader has to really step in and kind of block or coach, or if necessary put the informal leader out of the team, because the informal leader should always serve and help the team. So one of the things that the book is helping you, and trainings, is to recognize the culture of a team and how you as a leader can really influence the culture to make it even better. So let's have a look again at the overview that we were talking about. It's the role of the Agile leader to really change the environment, because in a healthy culture, teams will take ownership on customer impact. And it's the new job of the leaders of the companies to create this environment for self-managing teams to thrive. In practice, these tools really help in creating this environment. And the tools are not the objective. The objective is to really change the environment and the mindset of the people and the leaders. But what I see a lot is that when you want to learn to cook, you need pens and knives to start learning to know how to make nice meals and to learn your job. So the reason why I focus and why I emphasize so much on tools is because I think that by doing agile, we can become more and more agile. Not by reading a lot of books or having this nice vision about agile, but by doing agile, we can become more agile. So I hope you get a nice overview of Agile Leadership Toolkit. And Lindsay, let's have a view on the questions the audience has given so far.
Sure. So we have a bunch of questions that have come in already. This first one is a great one to get us started. Most of the traditional leaders focus more on output instead of customer outcome and impact. How do you embrace the outcome mindset? Came in from Gaurav.
Yeah, very, very good question. So one of the things is that I have this conversation about with them. So why do you want to focus on output? And what I often see is that we focus on output because there isn't a real alternative to talk about value. So one of the things that I do is asking a lot of why questions. So why do we need this functionality, and how can we see if this functionality or this thing that we do is actually improving? And it's mostly because the leaders are so routine or so accustomed to focus on output that we keep on steering on output. But what I actually see is that when you give examples of not steering on output but on impact is actually improving, that they start believing it. So my approach is often in 3 steps. In the first step, I try to open the mindset for the alternative of impact and value, and then when that is successful, I go to the second step. And in the second step, we measure both the traditional way of using the metrics and we use the new metrics. And a very crucial part in that is asking the leaders after a few weeks or months, is this new metric actually giving us a better insight than the traditional metrics of velocity? And when they do that, I make a distinction between metric where we steer on, which is on value, that is what we want to optimize, and we track a lot of data, and then velocity and output becomes the data that we look at. When you compare it to the soccer example, we steer on whether we win the matches, and we use a lot of data for miles run on the field, number of corners, and number of successful passes to improve. So velocity is not a bad data to track, but velocity is just a bad thing to optimize solely. And that really helps a lot of leaders to start steering on value.
Great. I hope that answers your question, Gaurav. If not, feel free to comment back in the box. Next question comes from Sven. Besides freedom, are there conditions that must be in place to help a team take ownership?
Yeah, there are a lot of conditions, but what I see over and over again is that when you remove the blockers that prevent the teams from taking ownership, 9 out of 10 teams really want to be proactive. And one of the final blockers is about trust. So what will actually happen when we take ownership? Are we going to be punished or not? Are we going to really be rewarded or not? So that's a trust relationship between the leader and the team. And the role of the coach or the scrum master or the facilitator is to make sure that we can talk about that part. Trust cannot be changed by just having a meeting of 3-4 hours. Trust can only be changed by showing the right behavior consecutive over a period of time. Yeah, but just asking the team whether they will try to take ownership, and making some agreements that they can actually say to the leader, well, your last sentence really throws away our trust and our passion to take ownership. Yeah, that's one of the most important blockers. And another thing is that what I see sometimes is that ownership is, the team doesn't really have a clear picture on what ownership is. So sometimes it's good to just brainstorm for half an hour or 45 minutes on the concept of ownership and what ownership is really all about.
Okay, that's a good explanation there. Switching gears a little bit back over to when you were talking about the ego within the team. George asked a question here. Could you give us an example regarding the ego in the team, and how can this be recognized on a daily basis?
Yeah, so one of the persons that when I was a manager way back, yeah, I've got this guy. Let's call him Jan or Mark for the sake of a name. And he was really one of the first developers of the company, already joining the company way back before I became the manager. And he was really the expert. And one of the things that bogged me down for a while is that when something went wrong and when a customer was complaining, the director really would walk, skipping various management layers, and walk straight to Mark and asking him to help. And Mark would just drop his keyboard and his current sprint activities, help out the customer for a few days, and then he was kind of the hero for the organization. And that's a bad informal leader, because he was, not because he had the wrong intention, but because he had the wrong influence. Because the team start to believe that when you don't follow the sprint backlog and don't follow the team agreements, you're actually going to be rewarded by the director himself. So I could not change the behavior of the director, but what I could change is talk about, so what will we do when the director comes again for asking to help out with a serious customer. And then we just created this little agreement that the product owner would be notified that the director had a bigger issue. The product owner would say to the director, saying, well, if we put Mark on this customer, know that this will be the consequences, because the team couldn't do anything else. And then Mark would take one of the other team members with him, solving the solution. So also some knowledge transfer would take place while solving it. And what it ended up with Mark really liking it, because easy problems which drained his energy and he didn't like to solve, some of the other team members were able to solve quickly. The team would also spend time on solving the problem structurally, and Jan could really help out with only the difficult parts and the difficult customers. So that's an example of a hero, and how by talking about it, using his right intentions but wrong, if I may say, wrong behavior, to change the team culture into a positive behavior and team culture. That's the first example.
That's a great example. There's another question here, more geared toward the Agile mindset. Marie would like to know, in your opinion, what is the Agile mindset?
Oh wow, that's a very good,
big question.
Very good question. Yeah, very good question. When the Agile mindset is basically that we can only know so much, and in complex environments and in complex systems, further analyzing and further studying the problem is not going to solve it. The only way to really solve it is start doing it. And one of the things that I say is that when you go back to 1492, you had this Columbus guy in Portugal, and he wanted to sail to India quicker by going to the west, which was kind of a bold and ambitious thing to do. But he kind of knew, and you could say that he was one of the first Agile leaders. Forgive me for saying that, because he knew that sitting on Portugal for another 2 years is not going to solve and get more knowledge. The only way to really start solving it is by sailing, by doing a step and learning from it. So when the agile mindset, from my perspective, is knowing that the only way to really learn is by going, by setting a step, getting feedback from customers, getting feedback from the team, and improve along the way. And don't trust too much on big plans, big forecasts, or big Gantt charts, but really understand that in complex and fast-changing market, the only way to survive is by setting steps, learning quickly, and improving your small steps.
Okay. Here's a cool question that came in about different cultures. Arjit says, many different cultures have different leadership models and techniques. There are different power distances and different organizational structures around the world. Does Agile leadership still fit in all of those?
Oh, a very, very good question. And I'm not the international culture on Agile leadership expert yet. Perhaps in 10, 20 years, I can better answer the question. But what I see is that when you talk indeed about power distance, that you cannot change the culture, the deep underlying experience and ingrained routine of the team, that they kind of expect the leader to make certain decisions. But what I do see is that when you use this diagram and really be able to talk about it, so which freedom, which kind of decisions really helps the team when the leader makes them. So, for example, of course, the color of the company or the color of the logo design, that doesn't help when all the teams can make changes in that. But also for other things. So let's talk about this and really be open about the expected power distance, and that some things we actually expect the leader to make decisions on, and that will thrive ownership and build trust, instead of making everything discussable and everything can be decided by the team. So that's the first part. The other part is a very important thing that hits the agile way of working, and that is, do we actually believe that the team is better than the individual? Is there a very individualistic culture, or is there a lot of family and team culture? You cannot really change how people are raised for 20, 30 years, and that they fundamentally believe that in the end people can fall back in families, for example, in cultures like India and Indonesia, or by the end people will have to decide themselves for more Western cultures like America, the Netherlands, and Sweden. But one of the things that's very important is to be able to talk about that. And that's, I think, I like about Agile, and then also the Scrum pillars. It's all about transparency. So are you able to talk about expectations on culture during retrospectives and team building meetings? And that's my biggest tip for conquering those international different cultures. Yeah. Do you have another question, Valencia?
I'm sorry, I was still on mute. Apologies about that.
Yeah.
That was a great answer there. This next question, others are probably wondering about this too. Can the leadership toolkit be applied to other types of organizations besides software development?
Yeah, very much. So a few parts of the tools were actually discovered in marketing departments or customer support departments. So one of the things at an energy company here in the Netherlands, there was this department of over 200-300 people that were just handling phone calls and doing all kinds of service requests from users. They pretty much use the same tools as explained in this webinar. And one of the key value indicators was preventing phone calls. That was a nice one. And they actually said, well, people don't want to call their energy company for all kinds of questions and things. So let's study the phone calls of the last 2 weeks, make a few adjustments on the website, on the app, and improve the process of bills and annual overviews. And people were actually really feeling part of this process of continuously improving, and along the way the leader gave his people more and more freedom to really decide themselves what is going to be the next functionality in the app to really prevent phone calls to the energy company, and how can we optimize the customer satisfaction score. So they pretty much use the same tools for a non-software development organization.
Yeah, and the same goes for Scrum, right? So Scrum is not used strictly just for software development. It's used in marketing, HR, and other industries as well. Next question here. So this one, I know that you go into a little bit of depth with some examples in your book. What does freedom actually mean in an agile organization, and is there any gray area?
Very good question. So freedom is what freedom actually means is I summarize it with the autonomy to make decisions. So who can make which decision when? For example, the content of the sprint planning, the sprint goal, but also perhaps about the strategy of the product, etc. So freedom is who can make which decision when. And I use a variation of the management 3.0 delegation poker to really explain the gray area. So, for example, when the decision is up to the manager, well, let's make that clear that the manager still makes certain decisions, or perhaps the architect, or perhaps the product owner, or the chief marketing. And the gray area, I don't know if the questionnaire really means that with gray, but the gray area is that there is not a black and white saying, well, the decision is either totally up for the manager or totally up to the team. But what delegation poker really explains is that some decisions are perhaps made by the manager, but he promises that for these types of decisions, he will first brainstorm with the team. So, for example, for adding a team member to the team, the manager promises that I will first ask your opinion. You will have the ability to talk with the candidate, and based on your feedback, I will make a decision. But I promise you, I will never make the decision before we have this brainstorm session with the team. So that's a nice example of, call it gray area, or really make clear whom after consulting we will make a decision. And that really drives ownership also, because people will feel part of the process, but are not perhaps totally responsible for everything in the organization.
Great, thanks. Still quite a few questions here, and we have a little bit of time. Please keep them coming in. Anything that we won't get to, we can answer offline. This next one is switching gears a little bit, but it's something that I know comes up quite a bit. Karan is asking if you have any suggestions on transitioning from a traditional business analyst mindset to a product owner mindset. They have several business analysts in their organization.
That's a very good question. So one of the things, the product owner is responsible for the vision of the product, to the release often and frequently to users, get user feedback to improve the backlog, and also do stakeholder management. So one of the things I ask is, well, you kind of have two alternatives for the business analyst, and one thing is to become part of the development team within the Scrum framework, and the other is to be a product owner. And what I actually hear is that some business analysts really like just to be part of the team, doing analysis, studying functionality, and don't per se want to put on stage and handling all those difficult stakeholders. Within the product owner training that we give within Scrum.org, we have this nice evolution of the product owner, and that nicely moves from scribe, which is kind of the lowest level of product ownership, where you are helping to write backlog items and make all kinds of detailed decisions, and really growing from proxy product owner up to business representative until you can call it a small entrepreneur or mini CEO. And depending on the organization, and also depending on your character and your talents, any level might be better for you than just going all the way up to small entrepreneur. So it's a mixture of growing step by step, and also be sound to yourself and really listen to yourself. What do I want to do? What do I want to become? Yeah, just a short answer.
Great, that was good. So here's a question regarding measurement when it comes to this chart that you still have up here. So how do I measure if and when my team is ready for the next stage in freedom and maturity?
I can give you a few examples of that on my website related to this book, and in the book there are many more examples. But one of the things, for example, is that you really want to measure the output of the team. So don't measure how many stand-ups did they had in the week, or how many feedback items do they have, or how many items do they have in the continuous improvement board. But really when you talk about maturity, as close as to winning the match on a certain level. With a road assistance company here in the Netherlands, and also with a big bank in the Netherlands, we kind of have 3-4 levels of maturity. And in the first level of maturity, it's all about achieving being reliable during sprint planning. So achieving the sprint backlog and achieving the sprint goal. So you could say that we look at 3 metrics. One metric is the reliability of the sprint planning, and it should be higher than 80 or 90%. So 80 or 90% of the estimated items is done by the end of the sprint. And if not, the team is informing the product owner and the stakeholders quickly, and necessary changes are made. Second thing that we look at is the happiness of the team towards the product owner, and the product owner towards the team, or if you talk about whole Scrum team, the Scrum team towards stakeholders, and the stakeholders towards the Scrum team. So the second thing is about happiness. And the third thing that we start is, do we actually have an indication of how satisfied the real users are with the quality? And then not about the availability, but really about the perceived quality of the product. So that's for level 1. And then you move up to higher levels when you really talk about, do other teams appreciate the help that they get from these experienced and more mature team? So you also ask about, you get feedback from other teams in the organization. Do you feel that you get the right help if needed from those teams, from those higher mature teams? And you also start using the KVI. So on level 3, you actually have a KVI, you trace it, you have a trend line of it. And you also use making decisions on your backlog on those items.
Awesome.
Yeah.
We have time for maybe 1 or 2 more questions. This is a good one that others are probably wondering after consuming all this great information that you shared. What can I start doing tomorrow to start with excellent agile leadership?
Yeah, my advice is always to either start with co-creating on goals or on this ownership. If you're a leader relatively close to the customers, really start focusing on the impact that we have on users, and whether it's clear for the teams what their impact should be and how they are scoring, and ask you feedback of the team to improve. So the first part would be KVI, and then just have a brainstorm session of 1 or 2 hours. What is the actual advantage that we deliver to our users? And the second thing is to talk about ownership, and you can either start with this ownership model without a staircase, like this, and just plot it on the screen, and ask the team, where do you feel you are, and how can we improve that? And another thing is to talk about ownership more in general. So what do we perceive with ownership? So tomorrow, either making clear what the actual impact is that we have on our users, and start tracing and getting clarity on that. And the second thing would be, or to start with this ownership part.
Great. So we're running up on time. Is there anything that you would like to close with, Peter, before we go into the closing slides here? By the way, any questions that weren't answered, I'm going to hand them over to Peter after this to address on an individual basis.
Yeah, we'll get back to that later. And people can also contact me through LinkedIn or send me an email. There are two things that I want to emphasize. And first thing is that what I see in practice is that it relatively takes 2 to 4 years for Agile leaders to grow. And what I hope is that it isn't an energy drain to know that it might take me 2 years to become an Agile leader. What I see is that it kind of frees you up, that you don't have to relatively be better in 2-3 months, but just take your time, develop your own style of leadership, discover what really fits you, and really improve this environment for self-managing teams. And to emphasize, one of the pitfalls of this book is that you start implementing and optimizing the tools, but the tools is only a way to get to the Agile mindset. So also an explanation towards your teams and your people, emphasize on what you want to achieve in the end, and not saying we want to implement the tool. So don't implement Scrum or Agile, but just create closer customer collaboration and more satisfied people.
Yeah, those are some really good points to keep in mind as we move forward from this webinar here. Go back to regular work. That's great. If you want to switch slides to go toward the end, just so everyone knows, I dropped in the chat box a link to purchase the book if you're interested. And we do have a 35% off discount code if you order the book through Inform IT. I put that in the chat box. It's Scrum.org in all caps. Currently, the book is available as an ebook and also available to be shipped to certain locations. More locations will become available as a little bit of time goes on, but the ebook is available. The book's also available on Amazon if you prefer to purchase through there. But if you want the discount, you can purchase through Inform IT. Just some quick closing items. At Scrum.org, we always encourage you to continue your learning. We have learning paths on our website for all of the roles in Scrum, including a leadership learning path. And these learning paths contain different learning competencies mapped to different pieces of content, including white papers, webinars, blogs, videos, all kinds of great stuff in there. It's all free resources, so please feel free to check that out. And if you could just go to the last slide, Peter. Please stay connected with us as well, and with Peter, as he mentioned, on LinkedIn, on social media, and also our forums are a great place to ask questions and get more information too. So with that, thank you so much, Peter, for this great talk, and thank you everyone for joining.
Yeah, thanks everybody.
Great session.
Yeah, I hope you learned a lot. Feel free to contact.
All right, sounds good. Enjoy your rest of your day, everybody. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.